This was a very special song. Also a song that carried with it a mystique. Brian was afraid of the song. He didn't want any part of it. He didn't even want it finished until they began working with it. It was, I think, part of the Smile area where the fire was in the across the street, and there was a stigma attached to it. And we would work on the song and hear Brian get in his car and leave. That was how much he was afraid of it.
Surf's up, board a tidal wave. Come about hard and join the young, and off in spring you came.
Surf's Up became the title track of the album, and combined with Jack Riley's impressive campaign to modernize the band, the song's inclusion helped the Beach Boys achieve their greatest commercial success in years. Yet if Brian Wilson's original compositions on the album suggested a broken man, he was in fact far from a spent force. As the group celebrated their return to the US Top 30, he focused his attention on other projects. Since the sessions for Sunflower, Wilson had been sporadically spending time and composing material with the young musician David Sandler, who had been introduced to him by bandmate Bruce Johnston. He was also looking for the right opportunity to work again with his wife Marilyn and her sister Diane Ravel, who he'd previously composed material for and produced as part of the girl group The Honeys in the early 60s. While the other Beach Boys had focused on the Surf's Up album, he decided to combine both of these outside projects, and Sandler was called in to begin work alongside Wilson as co-producer and songwriter for a new band, Spring, with Marilyn and Diane on vocals and Stephen Desper behind the desk.
I just think that he needed to sort of stretch his legs a little bit. I think his calling me and wanting to produce something that was not a Beach Boy project would be an example of that. Brian was definitely a person who would try things. It was amazing how little resistance there was between him and something new.
Brian was happy to have an outlet, a creative outlet. The idea was to do it inexpensively by using old tracks that were borrowed from the Beach Boys and then adding to them. The studio was there, the engineer was there. You just as well use it.
I think that he was searching. You know, he said, I've done this, and I'd like to take a look at all this and see what the next step is, or if there is a next step.
I love it when you talk to me. I love it when you talk to me. But you're...
Convinced this was the next step, as well as recording a clutch of familiar cover versions, Wilson also began working on new material with Sandler. This was a notable collaboration, because unlike Mike Love or Van Dyke Parks, the young songwriter was first and foremost a musician rather than a lyricist.
He'd be playing, and then he'd get up, and I'd sit down and play. So yeah, there was that, you know, two people are basically musically oriented. And when I was writing at that time, I'd riff, and I'd get a riff going, and then I'd get a melody and words to go with it. I think there was a burst of energy in it. An album can be a place where chemistry takes place, and it's inexplicable, it's an intangible. People come together, and they don't even know it's happening. It's just taking place, and it happens over time. And then at some point during the process, they say, hey, you know, something's happening here. That was definitely, I think, an experience for Brian in the midst of his reassessments.
I'm looking up. What do you see? I see the sky. Can't tell me why. I look and wonder.
Creatively, Spring was where Brian got to do his own thing. He did only 4 songs on that. He did Sweet Mountain and, you know, Tennessee Waltz and a few other things, you know. But Desper had a great hand in creating that album too, and David Sandler too. That's a collaboration, but it also gives Brian the chance to feel his way through new kinds of sounds and new kind of things, you know. Spring is one of his great moments. You know, he actually is a member of the Spring group. He's the third voice. Ginger Blake is no longer part of the Honeys. It's Diane Ravell and Marilyn Wilson. Brian Wilson's the third voice. And on 4 tracks, a production element.
He was thirsty for some kind of inspiration. Maybe it was spring, maybe it wasn't. And, you know, he'd done the Beach Boy thing for 6 or 7 years, and they were touring, and, you know, it was a business. So I think he just wanted something to inspire him. And I was always worried that when I worked with him that, you know, that I would be seen as somehow taking him away from what was for them bread and butter, you know. So I just try to keep my distance from anything that had to do with his relationship with them.
I don't think it was a big enough endeavor for Brian. Brian needed to form his own band, is what he needed to do. He wasn't in charge anymore, so maybe that was more of a psychological weight for him to bear than we all realized at the time. And in hindsight, wonderful thing, hindsight, but maybe it would have been best for the Beach Boys to break up. Who knows?
By the time the album was released to little fanfare in July 1972, Wilson's other band also had a new LP completed and in the stores. With a recently purchased recording venue at their disposal, Brother Studios in Santa Monica, the Beach Boys had worked for the first time at a real distance from Brian. Carl Wilson still at the helm, they strengthened their sound with new recruits Blondie Chaplin and Ricky Fattar, and by early 1972 had completed a new collection of material. Yet after the positive performance of Surf's Up, Carl and the Passions' So Tough failed to connect with either the public or critics.
I tend to think that Carl and the Passions is rather underrated. It's generally sort of slagged off over the years, but I think the Beach Boys at this point are coming together as a sort of cohesive ensemble in a new way, directed by Carl, augmenting the lineup with Blondie and Ricky, and I think it kind of works. I think it's as close as the Beach Boys came to being a kind of Californian rock band. We all spend so much time sort of lamenting the decline of Brian's genius that we tend to miss the upside of that, which is that the others do, you know, come out of the woodwork and produce work that's maybe not as great as Pet sounds, but it's credible.
Brian Wilson was involved as a songwriter on 2 tracks, however. You Need a Mess of Help to Stand Alone and Marcella, yet as a performer he was all but absent.
There's enough of him there where, you know, you can kind of sense his presence, but in an equally unexpected is the fact that a lot of the other songs on the album are better, maybe, or more, you know, or are just as good. Let's put it that way.
I don't think You Need a Mess of Help Standalone stands out particularly as a Brian composition. I mean, you know, if you compare Carl and the Passions to Surf's Up, some of the peak moments on Surf's Up definitely are the Brian Wilson tracks. You know, Surf's Up itself, of course, Until I Die. I mean, those are the peaks of that album. I don't think on Carl and the Passions you can say the same thing.
Yet understanding that the reclusive composer was still the main draw for the band's fan base, Warner's not only chose both of Wilson's compositions as singles, but also ensured that despite his disinterest, he still appeared to be a member of the group.
The photo on the cover of Carl and the Passions is striking for a few reasons. First of them, the addition of Ricky Fattar and Blondie Chaplin, South African musicians who Carl had really developed a deep relationship with and had them join the Beach Boys. And they brought a whole new, and I think in many ways, a very welcome addition to the sound, because they were both good performers, they good musicians, and they kind of added some grit to the Beach Boys sound. So you have that, and you also have Brian, who seems to be there, but actually has been very craftily edited into this photograph that is actually an image of him from a completely different place and time. They have to find an artificial way to reintroduce him into the community.
And that community still wanted Brian Wilson to play a more active role in their music. In June 1972, the Beach Boys headed for Holland to begin working on their next album. A radical relocation of their studio enabled them to write and record in a new environment, one which the band hoped would fuel their inspiration. Yet as they tried to coax Wilson out of his isolation to join them, he had already found inspiration elsewhere. Randy Newman was a new breed of singer-songwriter, a piano-based performer and composer with major critical appeal, and his 1972 album Sail Away reignited Wilson's interest in contemporary music.
He hadn't really come out vocally about any rock and roll for a long time, since Rubber Soul, which is like December of 1965. And here it is, 1972, and he embraces Randy Newman's Sail Away. Well, why is he even opening his ears to that? Because people he knew and people he was involved with were making that record. You got Russ Heidelman, Lenny Waronker, who was tight with Van Dyke Parks. Van Dyke was, very involved with Randy Newman's career at Warner Brothers. So he hears about it because his friends are into it, and Randy Newman was obviously an incredibly skilled songwriter and a piano-based songwriter, right? And the kind of sound that's on that record, Brian gets it. It just makes total sense to him.
In America, you get food to eat. You won't have to run through the jungle and scuff up your feet. You just sing about Jesus and drink wine all day.
It's very dark, and it has the feel of a circus sideshow. And also this weird sort of old homey feel to the title track, which is a hugely ugly recitation by a slaver, spinning these fairy tales for these, for the enslaved people being shipped off to the U.S., and how everything's going to be perfect for them when everything's going to be hell for them, and would continue to be thus, not just through slavery, but also through the terrible, segregated years and, and even now to a degree. To my mind, Brian's connection to that album, and it was a deep and abiding connection, was, it sort of resonates to the core of his tragedy. That he could identify with this godless world that Randy Newman was describing. I think by the time that they were getting ready to record Holland, he was feeling thoroughly and utterly bereft of light. The other guys in the band and his wife and the kids had all shipped off to Holland, and he's sitting there and he's supposed to fly out, and he ain't going, and what he's doing is that he's staying home listening to Sail Away.
When Wilson did finally cross the Atlantic and contribute to the album, the major composition he laboured on showed little of Newman's influence. The epic musical fantasy Mount Vernon and Fairway seemed to rise from the same creative impulse that had forged A Day in the Life of a Tree, and again the other band members were baffled. In January 1973, the result of the Beach Boys' European experiment was issued, the LP Holland, and it was decided that Brian Wilson's lengthy Anomaly was simply too incongruous to fit on the album. It was instead included as a bonus EP.
Musically, it's fantastic. It's strange. It's got a lot of spoken word pieces in it, which again are voiced by Jack Riley. But also, again, speaking from the heart, from the essence of his soul, about his experience with music. And it's all about, because that Mount Vernon and Fairway is a direct reference to the street corner outside the teenage Mike Love's house, where he and Brian would sit up and sing, harmonize on songs like in cars outside the house. And so I think at that point, he was definitely ready to kind of, not only romanticize the beauty of that, but then also delve into, that there was always someone not far away ready to take it away from him.
There was a mansion on a hill, but deep in a secret kingdom where a young prince lived. He had 4 sisters and 4 brothers. The prince had a special bedroom on the ground floor with a window that looked down into a deep, deep forest.
When you bought Holland, you played that EP once probably, and you never played it again, and it just seemed a strange sort of footnote or indulgence. And what did it really mean? Now you kind of look back and it's almost like Brian as Michael Jackson in Neverland or something.